Hey everyone, this is Chris from Deus Ex Machina. There was supposed to be a January update, but I honestly thought I had already done one. So consider this a January update with a February update still to come. At this current point, we are doing the final layout for Chapter 10 monsters for Amethyst Factions, which requires the most work when it comes to art and adaptation from the various systems. However, this gave me the opportunity to develop the other editions of the game up to Chapter 9, meaning we are still committed to releasing at least 4 of the books around the same time. The February update will focus mostly on that chapter, as it will be by and far the longest to do. And the subsequent 2 chapters after are relatively minor ones in complexity. However, I wanted to focus on page count. We're looking at Chapter 9 here in a second, which is a fluff chapter. There are 4 of these, and they are each identical. Identical layout, which is not hard to believe as there are no rules in these chapters. But we end each chapter, you'll notice something interesting. So let's take a look. All right, so we are looking at Chapter 9, Southam, which is South America. It's kind of an ugly slur, which some people use, but the locals don't. And then we see an image in the top left, the cover image. This is the Norask Marsh. We'll be seeing that later in the chapter. Now, what we're looking at here is, I do believe, the 4th edition version. I'm going to skip it over to the 5th edition. And we'll see that nothing changes, except for something you might not have noticed. So we'll see here that Southam starts on page 240, and we'll screw through. This is our new map by Chris Stilson, my new cartographer. Nothing wrong with the old cartographer, but since he is in the editing phase, he's able to make I feel, a more accurate map because it kind of gets adjusted depending on our content. This is a high-resolution map. We'll be releasing extremely detailed maps with the Kickstarter, so you won't be relegated to just this one. And of course, the advantage of that is that we can cut sections of it and zoom in and get a lot more detail, like we see here. You'll be seeing that a lot through these chapters. We had some more artwork. Showrunner Taos with a wave crasher. So for the first time, we have a wave crasher image. Delacour, and then we see more zoom maps, more artwork. And the only type of crunch here, but this is not much is going to change between the rules. I'm not terribly worried about that. And over here we have some other cool artwork. Some fluff, a lot more fluff. There's the Norask Marsh again with a larger zoom of that image. The Bastion of South America, Novo. Some details on that. Ogres. Vakai, which is the Tenenbree underground empire. And then we end on page 297. Now, I always ended with a bit of fluff from new fluff. This is not from the original Aiden's Way book. This is from Controlling Chaos, which is the sequel book. So once again, we put elements of that story in here. Now, how much is dependent on when this chapter ends. And because all of these end on the same point, this is going to have the same amount of space. However, because of the content with other chapters, they don't always end at the same point, which means the fluff and the placement of that story changes depending on which edition. And another good example is, once again, switching back to the 4th edition book, and we zip over to the end of that, eventually. There we go. We see a little different. Now, once again, it still ends at the same point, on the same place in the same layout, but we notice that we keep on going. We go on for a little bit further, and I have another filler image there, but we end on page 295, right? So I go back to 5th edition, page 297, 4th edition, 295, right? Now, of course, why is that? And that's because crunch, the rules, a game with more rules is obviously going to have more rules in it. For Amethyst Factions, where a game that's rules light, it's going to have fewer rules in it. So when we switch to Pathfinder and 5th edition are similar, we can see here, and then when we jump to the end, we see 293. Now, once again, we'll notice that it's extremely similar. Here, it's only 2 pages off the 4th edition, right? And because of the way the content is, these chapters are going to be basically identical. Now, when we jump to 13th Age, we'll see something else. 281. So that's a huge difference. So now we're looking at only 2 pages, right, between a handful of variations, only 2 pages between there, 2 pages between there, but we jump to nearly 10 pages to 13th Age. Now, once again, why is that? And that's because 13th Age is the lightest rule system that I'm writing for. 13th Age is a much more narrative system, although it is 4th edition based, because it's based on a lot of similar architecture to 4th edition. It's a lot more abstract, a lot more vague, gives a lot more freedom for interpretation. And because of that, you'll be seeing a lot. You'll be seeing a smaller page count. Now, as a bit of an offset, I've tried to include a bit more of these story segments in the 13th Age edition, but not more setting stuff. So there won't be anything exclusive. And that's one thing I wanted to stress. There's not anything that's exclusive to one edition. The other ones don't when it comes to the setting. Now, this wasn't necessarily true with the Core Factions book, because as we developed it, some additional content got put in order to flesh out certain areas that we found in later editions. So Amethyst Quintessence, which is the 5th edition version, is the most complete, and unfortunately does have some content that maybe the 13th Age or the original 4th edition compendium books didn't have. We're not doing that with Factions. Factions is going to have all the exact same content, all the exact same artwork. Maybe not potentially this filler piece here, which is a zoomed up version of Novo, but it's not an altogether new image. It's just a recycle. And then we see that a couple times. Images that I really love, you may see a zoomed up version of a cropped version of it, just as a way to filling up the excess dead space in a chapter. But this is an example of what I mean by page count. Now, I can't really show you guys a development idea of what's going on with Chapter 10, because Chapter 10 isn't done yet. But that's an example where the layouts and the page counts are going to be vastly different. As you guys know, a 5th edition monster is about the same size as a 4th edition monster, about the same. Pathfinders are a little bit bigger, a little bit more complex, but 13th Age is like 2 inches, 3 inches tops. It's half the size. So you're going to see a considerable amount of empty space that I just can't work around, because the illustrations are a certain shape, and I don't want to crowd all of the monsters on one page and then have all these illustrations that have nothing on them. So we have to have like 1 or 2 monsters every page, which means the fluff will eventually run out because we don't have the large text of rules to fill it up. I've noticed that with 5th edition, where I'm adding in little pieces of other illustrations to try to fill in some of the gap. I know that's not how they did it in Player's Handbook. They resize, they reshape. They say you have this much space to write setting fluff. I write as much setting fluff for a monster as I feel deems appropriate. I go back and I figure out how to play with it. That includes resizing certain illustrations, or in some cases cropping some illustrations and replacing them somewhere else to add some weight. But as a result, one of the things we're doing is that I'm not considering a page budget. Some books say you can't go higher than 240 pages. As you can see here, already with the 5th edition book, we've blown. 5th edition book is going to be the largest one, clearly, because I was already going into chapter 9. It's already the biggest section. So yeah, at 297 pages, we haven't even got to the end of the book. And remember, Core Amethyst Foundations wasn't past 240. The core books for the Kickstarter have all been quite large. They've all been in excess of 300 some pages, with the Big Amethyst Quintessence being something like 400 and something. So right now, as it stands, it looks very clearly that we're going to be pushing the 400 page mark for Factions. Once again, since there's no physical distribution for this game, I am not even caring. It's about producing as much content to make it worth your while, to make the wait really, really worth it. After Chapter 10, which is probably going to be 50 pages, I'm not kidding, of monsters, we've got good dragons, we have more bad monsters, some more cruel things. I'm going to show you some illustrations here in a quick second. That's going to be a big chapter. And then we have at least 2 more chapters past that, including a new adventure. And that's when we get to close up, do the index, and then the book and the game is out. Right now, there's a handful of illustrations still left to do for monsters. Then I have to do the painful adaptation of all the monsters to the various systems. 13th Age, easy. 4th edition, not so much. It's a bit tricky. Pathfinder, I'm going to be pulling my teeth out. I remember when I adapted the Pathfinder, the monsters for Core Amethyst into Pathfinder, it took me a month, and I cannot afford for me to take it that long. I have to be able to burn through these monsters as quickly as humanly possible to make sure that these monsters are done, they're balanced, they're fun, they're fair, and then I have to get them out the door. I can't because it's such a grind to create Pathfinder monsters, and I'm really hoping with this new version of Pathfinder coming out that they've addressed it. Okay, so let's take a look at the artwork. Okay, so here we are taking a look at Vanaka. Now, we already saw this image in the tour through Chapter 9. This is a famous old photo. We're also recycling that for the AZ dragon, which are the kind of Asian-themed dragons popping up. And we finally got some stats for them. Released Janai, who's a character that we've seen a couple times. Oh, yes. I do let my artist, Nick, and he has a group of people working with him to basically have carte blanche over some of their designs. So when they come up with something weird and interesting like this, I gotta let them go with it. I gotta let them play in the sandbox. So this was like, I want a small, ugly, repurposed machine, and then he made this, and I'm like, this looks like a friggin' nightmare. So I'm looking forward to the stats have been made. I may have to modify the stats to make this work. So the cover image, Chigoth, we've seen that a couple times. Ooh, look at that. This is something we'll be showing off a lot more. This is a Guardian Dragon. This is one of the three good dragons that we see. The other ones are the Holy Dragon and the Noble Dragon. But the Guardian Dragon is this one. Didn't want it to look like a Draconian. I wanted to show it that it is a bit more humanoid. But it is huge. It is very large. We can see the scale there. It's an awesome. And there are some Iron Suns. Those are two very specific characters fighting some Kythics. Ooh, I'll show you guys what that's about later. There are the Kythics in general. Those are the anathema of the Tenebrae. They've been mentioned a couple times. We had stats for them in the very first D20 game, but they're finally getting full stats for all the other editions. We have our Gulath, which are various vampires. We have 4 different versions. This is a Nihilomorph. Now, this is a chaos creature, but don't get it confused with something like a chaos beast or other various monsters from D&D. In a lot of those, in that pantheon, chaos is kind of connected to hell and evil, where chaos in Amethyst is connected to the power of magic, the power of all the elves, the dragon, all comes from this force of chaos, which is Atracana. So people attribute Atracana to good, even though Atracana is chaos. And this is showing you that, unfortunately, it's not always good. Sometimes the influence of Atracana does create pure chaos, and so that's another example right there. This is the Nihilomorph. There's 3 versions of it in the book. And then here comes a really awesome one. You can't see the whole image, unfortunately, because of the way the screen cap is looking. But this is a Noble Dragon. Another fantastic image. Really, really beautiful illustration. There's a lot of go back whenever we design these things, specifically in the way the creatures look. Like, the first design didn't have the armor plating, and we added the armor plating. And every time they came back with the design, I said, make the eyes bigger, make the eyes bigger, make the eyes bigger. And that's kind of final design. And it's a great approach. I really like the way it came out. Now, this is an Ograk, which is kind of our, it's a variation. It's an upscale ogre. It's the stopgap between an ogre and a Chigoth. So it follows that kind of design aesthetic. And then we have a Phyrus. Obviously taken some inspiration from some certain movies or TV shows dealing with vampires. These are the worst vampires you can see. Not the most dangerous. They're actually quite weak compared to a vampire lord, but they're the most de-evolved. The most powerful vampire lords are the ones that look almost indistinguishable to human. We're playing off of the romantic side of vampires and not necessarily the D&D classic vampire. This is a cool one. I have to admit, this is a joke I had with Nick. We were designing things for these new saints, which are getting a lot more fleshed out. This is one of the robotic designs. And when we came up with the design, I had 2 suggestions. One is that I want to have a big bright red light on it, and I thought it needs to have a cape. Because I have these rules. There's certain rules when you're developing projects, settings, games, or what have you. They're a goofy set of rules, and I like them, and they always seem to help. One is that when you're creating anything robotic, if there's something missing, add a big bright red light. 2, despite what Incredibles tells you, capes are always cool, and everything can work with a cape. You can put a cape on a vampire, a robot, or a dragon. Capes are always awesome. And that's basically it. I'll have an update probably in a couple weeks once Chapter 10 is done and finished. It is a challenge because you have to move these fixed tables of monsters along with these relatively intractable kind of illustrations, and then hopefully the fluff will work around it. And then once you have it, you can then move on to a new page with a new monster rather than having an orphan piece of dialogue or having a large amount of white space. When 5th edition moves to 4th in Pathfinder, that's going to be pretty easy. 13th age is going to be difficult to make it look pretty. But at the end of the day, I want to make the illustrations pop, and I want to make the stats pop, and make the book really, really good. But anyway, that's it. And I'll see you guys hopefully in a little bit. Like I said, I'll post some of these images on the Kickstarter update, but the best thing to do is to watch this video and also subscribe too, because I do a lot of other things on this channel. Since I'm going into other projects, since I'm writing full-time, I'm doing this Deus Ex Machina as a full-time gig, at least for the next year. And I have a couple more projects. Like I said, we are working on another Kickstarter that's going to start once this one is nice and not free and clear. And preview for that, it's only going to be 5th edition, because I do not want to spend 4 years working on it like I did this one. All right, guys. Bye.